The rancher was arriving at the festival with his new blonde girlfriend when the auctioneer announced the new neighboring ranch owner. His entire body froze at the entrance as he saw her walk onto the platform with three beautiful little girls in matching cowgirl outfits and the respected white-haired veteran rancher who had outbid him for the best land last year. But before we dive into the full story, let me know where you're watching from and what time it is. Now subscribe to the channel and let's get started. The first snow of winter fell over Oakville, Montana, as Amara Johnson clutched the positive pregnancy test in her trembling fingers. At 29, she had built a promising career as a financial analyst at the town's only bank, a position that had surprised many when a black woman from Chicago took it 3 years ago. Snowflakes gathered on the windshield of her used pickup truck as she navigated the winding road leading to Williams Ranch, the sprawling 10,000-acre property that had dominated the county for 5 generations. Her heart alternated between joy and apprehension. The ranch house appeared on the horizon, imposing with its stone facade and tall windows glowing amber against the darkening sky. The Williams family name was synonymous with power in this part of Montana, and for the past 3 years, Amara had been involved with the family's heir apparent. Elijah Williams, 32, had pursued her with the confidence of a man accustomed to getting what he wanted. Their relationship had raised eyebrows in Oakville, where Amara remained one of the few black faces in a sea of white. She had eventually won over some hearts with her intelligence and grace, though never that of Thomas Williams, the family patriarch who barely acknowledged her presence at the rare dinners she was invited to attend. Amara parked her truck near the side entrance, away from the gleaming luxury vehicles that belonged to the family. She tucked the pregnancy test into her coat pocket, took a deep breath of the crisp winter air, and walked purposefully toward the house. Jorge, the longtime groundskeeper, nodded to her as she entered. "Mr. Elijah is in his office, Miss Johnson." The house smelled of pine and cinnamon, festive scents that contrasted with the knot in Amara's stomach. She made her way down the hallway lined with portraits of Williams' ancestors, each face seeming to watch her with the same cool blue eyes that had captivated her 3 years ago. The door to Elijah's office was ajar. He sat behind his mahogany desk, reviewing financial reports, the fireplace crackling behind him. His blonde hair caught the golden light, and for a moment, Amara remembered why she had fallen for him. His easy charm, his confident smile, the way he had made her feel like she belonged in his world. "I'm pregnant," she announced, stepping into the warmth of the room. The only sound was the ticking of the pendulum clock, an 1890 heirloom that had tracked the Williams family fortunes for generations. Elijah's blue eyes met hers, and the ice that formed in them immediately chilled her to the bone. He rose slowly, deliberately, as if each movement calculated the impact of his next words. "How certain are you?" "3 tests, all positive." Amara moved closer to the desk, searching his face for any sign of the man who had whispered promises of a future in her ear just weeks ago. Elijah walked to the window, gazing out at the snow-covered fields. "A black child will never have a place in the Williams dynasty," he stated with clinical coldness. "Our lineage traces back to the first settlers of this state. My father would have a heart attack." The words hit Amara like a physical blow. "Elijah, this isn't about lineage, it's our child. Let's be realistic, Amara. You were interesting, different, but you always knew this was temporary." He returned to his desk, opening the drawer and retrieving his checkbook. "I think $50,000 should resolve the problem." "Problem? Is that how you see our child?" Amara's voice trembled as the reality of his response sank in. "Be sensible. Do you really think you can raise a child here? In this town? In this state?" His lips curled into a cruel smile. "Go back to the Chicago ghetto you came from. You were never more than an exotic experiment to me." The pen scratched against the paper as he filled out the check, the sound amplified by the deafening silence. As he pushed the paper toward her, he added, "And don't worry about your things. I've already asked Jorge to pack them. They'll be at the Continental Hotel front desk by tomorrow." Amara stared at the check, her vision blurring. 3 years of my life, and this is what it meant to you? What did you expect? That I would marry you? That we would raise a half-breed child as the next Williams heir? He laughed, the sound hollow and cruel. My family has standards to maintain. 2 hours later, Amara sat on the bed of a cheap hotel on the outskirts of town, surrounded by 3 boxes containing 3 years of her life. The tears finally came, uncontrollable, as the snowstorm howled outside, mirroring the storm that devastated her inside. She placed a hand on her still flat stomach. "It's just us now," she whispered to the life growing within her. The next morning, she called the bank to request a personal day. Her supervisor's voice was cold and formal. "Actually, Amara, we need to discuss your position. Could you come in at 10? When she arrived, Thomas Williams was waiting in the manager's office. Elijah's uncle didn't bother with pleasantries. "As the primary shareholder of this institution, I find your continued employment untenable given recent developments." By noon, Amara had cleaned out her desk. Her career at the bank terminated with a paltry severance check. In the span of 24 hours, she had lost her relationship, her home, her job, and her dignity. With nowhere else to go, Amara used a chunk of her savings to rent a room at the Continental for a week while she figured out her next steps. Each night she curled around her stomach, whispering promises to her unborn child. "We'll be okay. We'll find a place where both of us belong." On her 3rd day at the hotel, she spotted Elijah's truck parked outside a cafe across the street. She watched through the window as he laughed with friends, apparently unburdened by what he had done. The sight solidified her resolve. She would leave Oakville. Billings, the largest city in Montana, became her destination. With its population of over 100,000, it offered anonymity and more opportunities than the small town that had rejected her. She found a tiny apartment to share with a waitress named Donna, who didn't ask questions about the pregnant woman needing a place to stay midwinter. The job hunt proved grueling. Her experience as a financial analyst counted for little without references, and her growing pregnancy became increasingly difficult to hide. After 2 weeks of rejections, she secured 2 positions: morning cashier at a supermarket and evening receptionist at a budget motel. Her days became a blur of exhaustion. Morning sickness plagued her throughout her shifts at the supermarket, where she forced smiles while ringing up groceries. Evenings at the motel desk were spent studying used financial textbooks during quiet periods, determined to keep her skills sharp. Nights were filled with silent tears in the bathroom, careful not to wake Donna in their shared apartment. At 12 weeks, Amara visited a public clinic for her first ultrasound. The technician's eyes widened as she moved the wand across Amara's abdomen. "Ms. Johnson, I'm detecting multiple heartbeats." Amara's own heart seemed to stop. "Multiple? As in twins?" "Triplets, actually. 3 distinct heartbeats." The cold floor of the clinic pressed against Amara's knees as she sank down, overwhelmed by the news. The doctor, concerned by her pallor and thinness, placed a gentle hand on her shoulder. "Is the father in the picture? You'll need significant support." Amara straightened her spine, wiping away tears with the back of her hand. "There is no father," she replied firmly, "but we'll be fine." As her 5th month of pregnancy approached, Amara's protruding belly became impossible to hide. The supermarket manager called her into his office one morning, his eyes avoiding hers as he fidgeted with a pen. "Amara, I'm afraid we have to let you go. It's an image issue. Customers have complained." That evening, desperate and with savings dwindling, Amara found herself driving her pickup to the outskirts of Billings, following directions to Sunset Valley Farm. She had heard about Curtis Montgomery, a 68-year-old black rancher known for his organic produce, from a customer at the motel. The small farmhouse came into view as she crested a hill. Curtis was working on a tractor in the yard, his weathered face lifting with surprise as her truck approached. He listened silently as Amara explained her situation and offered to help with his accounts in exchange for a room. "I don't need charity," she finished. "I'm a skilled financial analyst. I can organize your books, create spreadsheets, optimize your profits." Curtis studied her for a long moment, his eyes taking in her pregnant form and the determination in her gaze. "Everyone deserves a second chance," he said simply, leading her toward the house. "The room ain't much, but it's clean." That night, as Amara organized Curtis's haphazard financial records at the kitchen table, she discovered something extraordinary. Despite its modest size, Sunset Valley Farm possessed one of the purest natural springs in the state, an increasingly valuable resource in the American West. "Curtis, do you know how much this land is worth?" she asked, amazed by the numbers. The old rancher didn't look up from the novel he was reading. Land ain't worth nothing if it ain't worked with purpose. 2 weeks before her due date, Amara went into labor during a fierce thunderstorm. Curtis drove her to the hospital in his ancient truck, cursing every pothole on the rural road. 3 identical girls were born that night, Olivia, Maya, and Zora Johnson. As she held them in her arms for the first time, Amara made a solemn promise to each one. "You will never be an experiment. You will never be temporary. And never ever will anyone tell you that you don't belong to this land." While the snow covered Billings that night, Amara couldn't imagine that, in 15 years, she would be the one deciding the fate of the lands the Williams had cultivated for 5 generations. The morning after making her solemn promise to her newborn daughters, Amara borrowed Curtis's laptop while nursing Olivia, the eldest of the triplets, by 7 minutes. Despite her exhaustion, her mind raced with calculations and possibilities. The hospital room was quiet except for the soft sounds of the baby and the rhythmic click of computer keys as Amara's fingers flew across the keyboard, sketching the beginnings of a business plan. By the time she and the girls were discharged from the hospital, Amara had created a detailed spreadsheet analyzing the potential of Sunset Valley's natural spring. The revelation had come to her during those long nights of labor. Curtis's most valuable asset was flowing untapped beneath their feet. Spring passed into summer, and the triplets grew with astonishing speed. Curtis had transformed the small storage room into a nursery, painting the walls a pale yellow and crafting 3 wooden cribs himself. "My mama always said yellow brings good fortune," he explained, hanging handmade mobiles above each crib. 5 months after giving birth, Amara received a call from the supermarket manager who had fired her. "We've had some staffing changes," he said awkwardly. "The position is yours if you want it back." "Thank you, but I've found a different path," Amara replied, watching through the kitchen window as Curtis rocked Maya on the porch swing. The rejection that had once devastated her now seemed like a distant memory, a necessary step on her journey. That evening, after putting the girls down for the night, Amara spread her business plan across Curtis's kitchen table. "I've been working on something," she began hesitantly. Curtis adjusted his reading glasses. "Been wondering what's kept you up typing all hours." Page by page, Amara walked him through her vision, transforming Sunset Valley Farm into Montana's first fully certified organic operation, starting with bottling and selling the pure spring water that bubbled endlessly from the ground. "Water rights are becoming more valuable than gold in the West," she explained. "Your spring produces enough to bottle and sell while still supporting expanded crop irrigation." Curtis studied the projections, his weathered face impassive. "These numbers look mighty optimistic, girl." "They're conservative, actually," Amara countered, pointing to comparable operations in neighboring states. "The organic market is growing 20% annually, and no one in this region is doing it right." "I don't have money to invest in all this," Curtis warned, gesturing to the equipment costs she'd outlined. Amara disappeared into her room and returned with a folded check, slightly wrinkled from being hidden away for months. "I have $50,000 that I never used," she said, smoothing the paper on the table. "And more importantly, I have 3 reasons not to fail." Curtis stared at the check, his eyes narrowing at the Williams name in the corner. "Where'd you get this kind of money?" Amara's jaw tightened. "From the man who didn't want his daughters." Understanding dawned on Curtis's face. He remained silent for a long moment before nodding slowly. Poetic justice, using his money to build their future. He extended his hand across the table. Partners, then. The days that followed brought relentless work. Amara would wake at 4 in the morning to feed the triplets, then work on licensing applications and business registrations while the girls napped. Curtis handled the farm duties and often cared for the babies while Amara researched bottling equipment and organic certification requirements. One morning, Curtis found Amara asleep at the kitchen table, her head resting on a stack of organic farming manuals, one hand still holding a pen. He gently draped a blanket over her shoulders, noting the dark circles under her eyes and the determination etched into her face even in sleep. When the first piece of bottling equipment arrived, a used filler capper machine purchased from a small brewery that had gone out of business, Curtis and Amara worked side by side to install it in the barn. They converted the space, cleaning decades of dust and hay from the wooden beams and installing proper drainage and sanitation systems. "My daddy built this barn in 1948, Curtis remarked as they worked. "Never imagined it would become a water bottling plant." "Is he still alive? Your father?" Amara asked, realizing how little she knew about Curtis's past. Curtis shook his head. "Passed 20 years ago. Mama too. Never had children of my own. Wife Martha and I tried, but wasn't in the cards." He smiled faintly. "Guess I'm making up for it now with 3 granddaughters all at once." The casual claim of kinship brought tears to Amara's eyes. In the months since her arrival, Curtis had become more than a landlord or business partner. He had become family. The first Sunset Valley spring water bottles were labeled by hand at the kitchen table, Amara carefully applying each sticker while the triplets slept in their cribs nearby. The labels were simple, an image of a sunset over rolling hills, with pure Montana spring water printed beneath. Their first sale came from the owner of a small health food store in Billings, who agreed to take 24 bottles on consignment. "The water tastes incredible," she told Amara after sampling it. "If it sells well, I'll order more." Within 2 weeks, the store called requesting 60 more bottles. By the end of the month, 3 additional shops had placed orders. As summer turned to fall, Amara began researching the organic certification process. The paperwork was overwhelming, the requirements stringent, but she was undeterred. Each night, after the triplets were asleep, she worked on applications and studied organic farming techniques. When the girls were 6 months old, Curtis taught Amara to drive the tractor. She balanced Olivia on her lap while Maya and Zora watched from their car seats, securely fastened to the porch swing where Curtis could see them from the field. "You're a natural," Curtis called as Amara navigated the gentle slope of the east field. "Looks like you've been farming your whole life." Amara laughed, the sound carrying across the autumn air. For the first time since leaving Chicago years ago, she felt truly at home. The triplets' first birthday approached as winter settled over Montana. One evening, while preparing their celebration, Curtis called Amara to the living room where the local news was broadcasting. "Record drought conditions continue to plague western Montana," the reporter announced. "Agricultural experts predict significant crop failures if conditions persist. The Williams Ranch in Oakville has already reported substantial losses." Amara froze at the mention of the name, her hand stilling on the tiny cake she was decorating. "The spring hasn't slowed a bit," Curtis observed. "Not even in the drought of 77 did it reduce flow." The realization struck them simultaneously. While other farms suffered, their water source remained abundant. In a drought-stricken landscape, Sunset Valley's natural spring was not just a business opportunity, it was liquid gold. The triplets' birthday party was a small affair, just Curtis, Amara, and the owner of the health food store who had become a friend. The girls smashed their cake with delighted squeals, their faces covered in frosting as Curtis captured photos on his old camera. Later that night, after cleaning frosting from 3 sets of tiny fingers and tucking the girls into bed, Amara found Curtis on the porch, gazing at the stars. "I've been thinking," she said, joining him on the swing. "With the drought, we should expand our water operation, and I want to start growing organic vegetables using our sustainable water supply." Curtis nodded thoughtfully. "Been thinking the same. Folks will pay premium for produce grown with pure water during drought times." The following week, Amara met with the owner of Natural Living Cafe in downtown Billings. The woman sipped the Sunset Valley water, her eyes widening. "This is the purest water I've ever tasted. I want exclusive rights to serve it in my cafe." The contract she offered, small by industry standards but significant for their fledgling operation, would provide stable income for the next 6 months. Amara signed immediately, her hands trembling with excitement. That evening, sitting at the kitchen table reviewing the signed contract, Amara burst into tears. Curtis placed a weathered hand on her shoulder, his silent presence more comforting than words. "We're really doing this," she whispered, wiping her eyes. "Building something real." "Never doubted it for a minute," Curtis replied. "You're the most determined woman I've ever met." As the triplets grew from babies to toddlers, their distinct personalities emerged. Olivia, the eldest, methodically organized her blocks by color before building. Maya covered any available surface with colorful scribbles, showing early artistic talent. Zora spent hours watching plants grow in the windowsill pots Amara had set up, fascinated by the natural world. On their 3rd birthday, Curtis led the girls to the barn, where a surprise waited: a gentle pony foal born just weeks earlier. "Every farm girl needs a pony," he explained as the triplets shrieked with delight, reaching small hands toward the patient animal. The celebration was interrupted by the arrival of an unfamiliar black SUV. A man in an expensive suit emerged, introducing himself as a representative of Western Resource Group. "I'll be direct, Ms. Johnson," he said after perfunctory pleasantries. "My clients are interested in your water rights. We're prepared to offer $100,000 for exclusive access to the spring." Amara exchanged a glance with Curtis before responding. "The spring isn't for sale. This land is the future of my daughters." The man's smile tightened. "Consider carefully. The drought is expected to worsen. The offer won't remain open indefinitely." After he departed, Amara spent the evening researching water rights acquisitions in drought-affected regions. Companies were paying premium prices, anticipating long-term scarcity. "They'll be back with higher offers," Curtis warned as they discussed the visit. "And we'll refuse those too," Amara replied firmly. "We're building something sustainable here, not just selling out for quick cash." That night, long after the girls were asleep, Amara remained at the kitchen table surrounded by books on organic farming, highlighting passages and making notes. Her eyes burned with exhaustion, but her mind raced with possibilities. When she finally succumbed to sleep, head pillowed on her arms amidst the books, Curtis found her there. He gently covered her with a blanket, noting the determination that remained evident even in her exhausted features. In the small bedroom where the triplets slept, Amara placed a photo of their first harvest on the wall, unaware that in just a decade, that image would grace the cover of Fortune magazine. The framed photograph of the first Sunset Valley harvest hung proudly on the wall of the triplets' bedroom, capturing 3 tiny girls sitting amidst a small patch of organic lettuce. Amara often found herself staring at it during the quiet moments of dawn, drawing strength from how far they had come in such a short time. By the time the girls turned 3, Amara had settled into a punishing routine. Her days began at 4 in the morning, when the farmhouse was still shrouded in darkness. She would prepare bottles, review accounts, and plan the day's work before the first rays of sunlight crept over the horizon. The early hours were her sanctuary, the only time she had entirely to herself. "You're going to work yourself to death," Curtis observed one morning, finding her at the kitchen table surrounded by spreadsheets and agricultural journals. Amara looked up, dark circles beneath her eyes. "I can't afford to slow down. Not yet." The triplets were now sleeping through the night, a small mercy that allowed Amara to focus on expanding their operation. Using Elijah's check as capital, they had constructed a modest bottling facility in the renovated barn. The Sunset Valley Pure Spring water labels, once applied by hand at the kitchen table, were now affixed by a small automated machine, their first significant equipment investment. One crisp autumn morning, Curtis found Amara by the edge of the east field, studying the land with intense concentration. "Thinking of planting here next season?" he asked, joining her. "If we're going to expand into vegetables, we need to start preparing the soil now," she replied. 3 years without pesticides makes this field perfect for organic certification. Curtis nodded appreciatively. "You've learned more about farming in 3 years than most do in 20. "I had a good teacher," Amara said, smiling at the older man who had become family. Their modest water bottling operation had secured regular contracts with health food stores throughout Billings, but Amara knew it wasn't enough to build the future she envisioned for her daughters. The organic vegetable market represented an opportunity to diversify and grow. The news from their old radio crackled one evening as Amara prepared dinner. Montana is facing its worst drought in decades. Agricultural experts predict widespread crop failures and significant economic impact for traditional farming operations. Curtis exchanged a knowing look with Amara. "Our spring hasn't slowed a bit, which means we can irrigate when others can't," she finished his thought, mind already calculating the advantage. That night, after tucking the girls into bed, Amara spread maps of the property across the kitchen table. "We need to design an irrigation system that maximizes efficiency. Every drop will count this year." Curtis pulled his chair closer. "Back in the 70s drought, my daddy used a gravity-fed system from the spring. Saved our crops when neighbors lost everything." Working together, they sketched plans for an updated version of the system, incorporating modern efficiency standards with Curtis's generational knowledge. The drought's severity became apparent as spring turned to summer. Fields across Montana turned brown, cattle were sold off as ranchers couldn't feed them, and water restrictions became increasingly stringent. Meanwhile, the Sunset Valley Spring continued flowing at full capacity, a miracle that didn't go unnoticed. "Word spreading about your water," remarked Donna, the waitress who had once been Amara's roommate, now a regular visitor to the farm. "Overheard some ranchers talking at the diner. They're calling it drought-proof land." The first significant opportunity came when Helena's Organic Market, a respected store in the state capital, placed an order for both water and any vegetables Sunset Valley could provide. "We can't meet their volume requirements yet," Amara worried, reviewing the order. "Then we plant more," Curtis said simply. "The south field is ready for cultivation." Days blurred together as Amara and Curtis worked from dawn until long after dusk. They hired 2 local teenagers to help with the increased workload, carefully training them in organic methods. The triplets, now approaching their 4th birthday, helped in their own way. Maya decorating delivery boxes with colorful drawings, Olivia meticulously counting produce into containers, and Zora collecting beneficial insects for the garden. The first full vegetable harvest exceeded even Amara's optimistic projections. While traditional farms struggled to produce anything in the drought conditions, Sunset Valley's irrigation system delivered precious water precisely where needed, yielding healthy crops with minimal waste. When the first substantial payment from Helena's Organic Market arrived, Amara sat on the porch steps, check in hand, tears streaming down her face. Curtis settled beside her, concern etched in his weathered features. "Bad news?" "The opposite," she whispered, showing him the amount. "We could buy a new delivery truck with this, expand the irrigation system, maybe even hire a full-time employee." He squeezed her shoulder, his eyes misting. "You did this, Amara. Your vision, your work." "We did this," she corrected, leaning against his steady presence. The triplets' 4th birthday celebration was a modest affair, but markedly different from previous years. Several neighboring farmers attended, curious about the operation that was thriving during drought conditions. Amara had prepared a small presentation showcasing their organic methods and water-efficient techniques. "You're essentially drought-proof," remarked Bill Peterson, a cattle rancher struggling to maintain his herd. "Would you consider consulting on my irrigation system?" By the end of the party, Amara had scheduled 3 consulting visits to neighboring properties, recognizing another potential revenue stream. That evening, after the guests departed and the girls were asleep, Amara caught a rare moment of local television news. Her breath caught as Elijah Williams appeared on screen, standing before the expansive Williams Ranch house. Despite challenging conditions, Williams Ranch is expanding operations, he announced confidently. "We've acquired an additional 1,000 acres and plan to increase cattle production by 30% next year." Curtis watched Amara's face carefully. "You okay?" She nodded, though her hands trembled slightly. "It's strange seeing him, like looking at a different life." "A life you're better without," Curtis affirmed. Amara turned off the television, her expression hardening into determination. "His expansion is reckless during a drought. Traditional cattle ranching requires enormous water resources." "Not your problem," Curtis reminded her. "No," she agreed, "but it makes our sustainable approach even more important." The following morning, Amara woke with renewed purpose. She spent hours researching drought-resistant crops and developing a 5-year expansion plan for Sunset Valley. When the triplets woke, she took them to the highest point on the property, overlooking their modest but thriving fields. "This is all for you," she told them, kneeling to their level. "Everything we're building here." "Is it our birthday again?" asked Maya, confused by the solemnity of the moment. Amara laughed, gathering all 3 into a tight embrace. "No, sweet girl, just a promise." As the drought continued into its 2nd year, Sunset Valley's reputation grew. Local news featured a short segment on drought-resistant farming methods, showcasing their irrigation system. The exposure brought more customers and consulting requests. With the increased income, Amara purchased an adjacent 5 acres that had been poorly managed and abandoned by its elderly owner. The land came at a fraction of its pre-drought value, a strategic acquisition that expanded their growing capacity. The triplets started kindergarten that fall, facing the wider world of Billings Elementary School. Amara watched with a mixture of pride and anxiety as they boarded the school bus, 3 identical faces peering through the window with matching expressions of excitement and apprehension. The first school conflict came sooner than Amara had anticipated. Olivia returned home in tears one afternoon, her usual composure shattered. "Tommy Williams said we don't have a dad because nobody wanted us," she sobbed into Amara's shoulder. The familiar surname hit Amara like a physical blow. "Williams? Is he related to the ranching family?" "His dad works for them," Olivia hiccuped. "He said we're not a real family." Amara gathered all 3 girls close, choosing her words carefully. "Families come in all different forms. You have Curtis, who loves you more than any father could, and you have me." "But why don't we have a dad like other kids?" Maya pressed, her artistic sensitivity making her particularly vulnerable to perceived differences. "Because we're special," Zora answered before Amara could, her matter-of-fact tone bringing smiles through tears. "We have Curtis instead. He's better than regular dads. He lets us drive the tractor." That night, after the girls were asleep, Amara found Curtis on the porch, his favorite thinking spot. "The Williams name followed us even here," she said softly, joining him. Curtis nodded, unsurprised. Small world, Montana, especially in agricultural circles. "I never want them to feel less than because of where they came from," Amara confessed, her greatest fear spoken aloud. "Those girls are extraordinary, Amara, just like their mother." Curtis's voice carried absolute conviction. "They'll never be less than. They'll be more than their whole lives." As Amara stood on the porch that evening, watching the sunset over their expanding property, she couldn't help but feel a surge of pride. While Elijah Williams was recklessly expanding his inherited operation, she was carefully building something sustainable from nothing, a legacy her daughters would never have to be ashamed of. While Elijah Williams smiled for the cameras on that newscast, he couldn't imagine that the woman he had discarded as an exotic experiment was building the empire that would one day swallow his own. While Elijah Williams smiled for the cameras on that newscast, a strange twist of fate was unfolding just 2 counties away. 5 years after the birth of the triplets, Amara found herself standing in the Sunset Valley fields on a crisp autumn morning, watching as a state inspector meticulously examined their crops and processing facilities. "Ms. Johnson, I've been inspecting farms for 27 years, the man said, removing his glasses to clean them thoughtfully. Rarely have I seen an operation transform so completely in such a short time. Amara's heart pounded as he reached into his briefcase and pulled out an official document bearing the state seal. Congratulations, Sunset Valley Farm is now 100% certified organic. Curtis, standing beside her, squeezed her hand as she accepted the certificate with trembling fingers. The triplets, now 5 years old, danced around them in excitement, though they didn't fully comprehend the significance of the moment. "We did it," Amara whispered, her voice catching. 5 years of backbreaking work, meticulous record-keeping, and stringent adherence to organic standards had culminated in this moment. That evening, after the girls were tucked into bed, Amara and Curtis sat on the porch, toasting their achievement with glasses of Sunset Valley spring water poured into dusty champagne flutes Curtis had unearthed from storage. "To organic certification," Curtis said, raising his glass, "and to the woman who made it happen." "To partnership," Amara countered, clinking her glass against his. "I couldn't have done any of this without you, Curtis." The following week, their first delivery truck, a second-hand vehicle freshly painted with the Sunset Valley Organic logo, departed the farm loaded with vegetables and bottled water. Amara watched it disappear down the dusty road, hardly believing how far they'd come from hand-labeled bottles on the kitchen table. With certification secured, Amara set her sights on expansion. The drought had eased somewhat, but its effects lingered in the agricultural community. Several neighboring properties struggled to recover, creating potential opportunities for growth. The Johnson Farmhouse Bank occupied a red brick building on Billings Main Street, its stately facade a testament to its century-long presence in the community. Amara straightened her only business suit, purchased second-hand but carefully tailored, before entering for her appointment with loan officer Richard Keller. "Ms. Johnson?" Keller greeted her with the cautious politeness she'd grown accustomed to as one of the few black business owners in the region. "I've reviewed your loan application." Amara took a deep breath, sensing his hesitation. "You have concerns?" "Frankly, yes. It's risky to lend for agricultural expansion in these times. The drought may have eased, but forecasters predict cyclical dry periods will continue." He shuffled papers, avoiding her gaze. "And your operation is still relatively new." Amara opened her portfolio, revealing meticulously prepared financial projections. "Mr. Keller, our profits have grown 200% in the last year alone. Here are the numbers." For the next 30 minutes, she walked him through detailed cash flow analyses, growth projections, and risk mitigation strategies. By the time she finished, Keller's expression had shifted from skepticism to grudging respect. "You've done your homework, Ms. Johnson," he acknowledged. "Let me present this to the loan committee. I think we can make this work." 3 weeks later, Amara signed the papers finalizing the purchase of the Anderson property, 80 acres adjacent to Sunset Valley that had fallen into foreclosure. The acquisition doubled their operational footprint, a strategic expansion that would allow them to meet growing demand. Standing at the property line with Curtis, Amara felt a surge of emotion. "Remember when I first showed up at your door, pregnant, desperate, with nothing but a business idea?" Curtis smiled, the creases around his eyes deepening. "Knew you were special the moment I met you, Not many people have that kind of fire inside. The triplets' first day of kindergarten arrived with a flurry of activity. Amara braided their hair identically, packed 3 matching lunchboxes, and tried to project confidence despite the anxiety gnawing at her stomach. Rural Montana schools weren't known for their diversity, and her daughters would be among the few children of color in their class. "Remember, you 3 take care of each other," she instructed, kneeling to straighten Maya's collar. "And if anyone says something unkind, tell your teacher." "We know, Mom," Olivia replied with the serious expression that made her seem far older than 5. "We're Johnson girls. We're strong." Watching the school bus disappear down the road, Amara felt the familiar ache of motherhood, the painful balance of protection and letting go. The girls thrived academically but faced the inevitable social challenges. One afternoon, Olivia returned home in tears, an unusual break in her composed demeanor. "Tommy Williams said we don't have a dad because nobody wanted us," she sobbed, clinging to Amara. The surname sent a chill through Amara. "Williams? As in, his dad manages cattle operations at Williams Ranch," Curtis confirmed quietly from the doorway, having overheard. "Boy's father is Elijah's right-hand man." Gathering all 3 girls onto the living room sofa, Amara chose her words carefully. "Families come in many different forms. You have Curtis, who loves you more than any father could. And you have me." "But why don't we have a dad?" Maya persisted, artistic sensitivity making her particularly vulnerable to perceived differences. "Because we're special," Zora answered matter-of-factly. "Regular kids have regular dads. We have Curtis. He's better." Curtis, who had remained silent in the doorway, turned away quickly, but not before Amara caught the moisture in his eyes. That night, after the girls were asleep, Amara found Curtis on the porch swing, staring at the stars. "You okay?" "Just thinking about those girls," he replied softly. "How blessed I am that you showed up that day." The rhythm of farm life continued, punctuated by new milestones. Their organic certification attracted premium buyers, and Sunset Valley products began appearing in specialty stores throughout Montana and neighboring states. The disaster struck without warning on a clear October morning. Curtis collapsed while driving the tractor, suffering what doctors later diagnosed as a mild stroke. Amara found him when he failed to return for lunch, slumped over the steering wheel, the engine still running. The drive to Billings Regional Hospital was the longest 20 minutes of her life since the birth of the triplets. Pacing the sterile waiting room, Amara realized how completely Curtis had become the foundation of their lives. Not just a business partner, but family in every way that mattered. "He's stable," the doctor finally reported. "The stroke was minor, but at his age, recovery requires significant rest. He won't be able to handle physical farm work for some time." The reality was clear. Sunset Valley needed help. For 5 years, Amara and Curtis had managed with occasional seasonal workers, but Curtis's condition necessitated permanent staff. Within a week, Amara had interviewed and hired 3 full-time employees, a field manager with organic farming experience, a distribution coordinator, and a production assistant for the bottling operation. "We don't just offer a job," she explained during the group orientation. "We offer participation in something meaningful. Everyone here receives profit sharing after 6 months." Curtis returned home after 2 weeks in the hospital, frustrated by his limitations but determined to contribute. "Just because my body's failing doesn't mean my mind is," he insisted, taking over the farm's bookkeeping and mentoring the new field manager. One evening, while reviewing supply contracts, Amara glanced up at the small television in the kitchen corner. The local news was featuring a segment on regional agricultural developments. Her hand froze mid-signature as Elijah Williams appeared on screen, standing confidently before the imposing Williams Ranch house. "Despite challenges in the sector, Williams Ranch is expanding operations," he announced, his tailored suit and polished appearance contrasting sharply with the working ranchers behind him. We've acquired an additional 1,000 acres and plan to increase cattle production by 30% next year. Curtis watched Amara carefully. You okay? She nodded, though her hands trembled slightly. It's strange seeing him, like looking at a different life. A life you're better without, Curtis affirmed. Amara turned off the television, her expression hardening into determination. His expansion is reckless during these climate conditions. Traditional cattle ranching requires enormous water resources. Not your problem, Curtis reminded her. No, she agreed, but it makes our sustainable approach even more important. That weekend, the triplets surprised Amara with a homemade certificate declaring her the best mom in the world, decorated with Maya's elaborate drawings, Olivia's precisely lettered text, and Zora's pressed wildflowers from the farm. Standing on the porch that evening, watching the sunset over their expanded property, Amara felt a profound sense of pride. The journey had been harder than she could have imagined, but the foundation was set for something extraordinary. In the small bedroom the girls shared, she hung the certificate alongside the photograph of their first harvest, unaware that in just 5 years, another photograph of her standing proudly before Sunset Valley's expanded operations would grace the cover of Montana Agricultural Quarterly. While Elijah Williams was recklessly expanding his inherited operation, he couldn't imagine that the woman he discarded as an exotic experiment was building the empire that would one day engulf his own. While Elijah Williams was recklessly expanding his inherited operation, Amara was meticulously building something sustainable from the ground up. 2 years passed since the organic certification, bringing with it exponential growth that sometimes left Amara breathless. On her 37th birthday, she stood before the newly installed sign at the entrance to their property, a sleek, professional marker that read, Johnson Organic Empire in elegant lettering. What do you think? She asked the triplets, now 8 years old, who stood beside her with matching expressions of awe. It's perfect, Olivia declared, always the first to speak. It sounds important. And the colors match our logo exactly, added Maya, who had helped choose the shade of green that now defined their brand identity. Zora, ever practical, simply asked, Does this mean we're officially an empire now? Amara laughed, gathering her daughters close. It means we're building something that will last, something that belongs to all of us. The transformation from Sunset Valley Farm to Johnson Organic Empire wasn't merely cosmetic. The operation had expanded significantly, now producing not just water and vegetables but also certified organic beef from a small herd of grass-fed cattle and a premium line of dairy products from their newly established creamery. Curtis, recovered enough to oversee operations though still walking with a cane, watched proudly as workers installed their first fully automated bottling line. The days of hand-labeling at the kitchen table seemed like another lifetime. Never thought I'd see robots on my farm, he remarked as the gleaming stainless steel equipment hummed efficiently. Progress, Amara replied, checking the production figures on her tablet. We've got orders from Idaho and Wyoming now. Can't fill them fast enough by hand. The farm had become a hive of activity, with 20 full-time employees and additional seasonal workers during harvest. The original farmhouse, once spacious for just Curtis, had been expanded to include proper offices, while Amara and the girls had moved into a newly built home nearby, modest but comfortable, with a bedroom for each growing girl. One afternoon, Amara found Olivia at the kitchen table, surrounded by spreadsheets and her small calculator. At 8 years old, her business acumen was already remarkable. What are you working on, sweetie? Amara asked, peering over her daughter's shoulder. I made a financial model, Olivia explained, pointing to her meticulous columns. See, Mom? If we invest here in more water capacity, the return will be 23% higher than if we expand the vegetable fields. Amara blinked, examining the surprisingly sophisticated analysis. Where did you learn to do this? From watching you, Olivia said simply. And I borrowed your finance books. The math isn't that hard. Later that week, Maya presented Amara with redesigned product labels for their entire line. "The current ones are fine," she explained, spreading her drawings across the coffee table. "But they don't feel premium enough. We need colors that show we're natural, but also special." The designs were astonishingly professional. Clean lines, earthy tones, and a subtle refinement that elevated the brand aesthetic considerably. Not to be outdone, Zora unveiled her science fair project that weekend, a modified irrigation system that reduced water usage by 30% while maintaining crop health. Her teacher had been so impressed that she'd invited an environmental science professor from Montana State University to evaluate it. "The principles are remarkably sound," the professor had told Amara. "Your daughter has an intuitive understanding of hydrodynamics that most college students lack." The girl's extraordinary talents weren't the only source of pride. The farm itself had become a model of sustainable agriculture, drawing visitors from across the region to learn about their methods. On warm summer evenings, Curtis would sit on the porch with the triplets, telling them stories that connected them to the land and its history. "Did you know there were black homesteaders in Montana long before I came here?" he'd explain, his deep voice carrying across the twilight. "Folks like the Martins and the Fords who broke ground in this very county back in the 1880s. The girls would listen, rapt, as Curtis wove tales of resilience and determination that mirrored their mother's journey in many ways. Through these stories, he gave them something Amara couldn't: a sense of historical belonging in a place where they often stood out. One crisp September morning, Amara collected the mail and found a glossy regional agricultural magazine among the usual bills and catalogs. Her breath caught as she saw her own face looking back from the cover, beneath the headline, "The Organic Queen of Montana: How Amara Johnson is Redefining Agriculture." The comprehensive article detailed Sunset Valley's transformation into the Johnson Organic Empire, highlighting their innovative techniques and remarkable growth. In an industry dominated by century-old family operations, Johnson has built an agricultural powerhouse in less than a decade, the writer noted, proving that sustainability and profitability can go hand in hand. Curtis found her sitting at the kitchen table, still staring at the magazine. "Looks like the secret's out," he said, squeezing her shoulder. "This changes things," Amara murmured. "People will be watching us now." The article indeed brought attention. Within weeks, Amara received an unexpected phone call from a Seattle number. "Ms. Johnson, I represent Evergreen Agricultural Investors," the voice explained. "We're very interested in what you've built at Johnson Organic Empire. Our group specializes in scaling promising agricultural operations to national prominence." The ensuing conversation led to a meeting scheduled for the following month. Amara spent weeks preparing, analyzing every aspect of their operation and clarifying her vision for the future. When 3 investors in tailored suits arrived via private plane at the small Billings airport, they seemed distinctly out of place in rural Montana. Amara greeted them confidently, leading the tour of operations with pride. "Your certified water source is extraordinary," noted the lead investor, a woman in her 50s with sharp eyes that missed nothing. "Combined with your organic certification and brand recognition, you've created something uniquely valuable." The formal proposal came during dinner at Billings' finest restaurant. $5 million for 30% equity. We can take you national immediately, with distribution channels already established in 17 states. Back at the farm, Amara spent sleepless nights weighing the decision. The investment would accelerate their growth exponentially, potentially transforming Johnson Organic Empire into a household name across America. "What do you think?" she asked Curtis one evening, spreading the proposal documents across his kitchen table, the same table where their partnership had begun 8 years earlier. Curtis studied the papers thoughtfully. "Fast money comes with fast strings," he observed. "You've built this without them. Question is whether you need them now." The girl's future would be secure, Amara mused. College funds, opportunities. "Those girls already have more opportunities than most," Curtis countered. "And they've got you for a mother. That's security enough." The triplets, curious about the visitors in suits, had their own opinions. Will we still be able to help design the labels? Maya worried. Can I still work on the irrigation systems? Zora asked. Olivia, pragmatic as always, had reviewed the proposal herself. They want too much control for what they're offering, she declared with the confidence of a seasoned business analyst. We should counter at 15%. After 3 days of deliberation, Amara invited the investors back to the farm. The women sat across from the men in suits at the conference table in their modest headquarters building. I appreciate your interest, Amara began, her voice steady, but I prefer to maintain complete control over my daughter's legacy. I must decline your offer. The lead investor leaned forward. Ms. Johnson, perhaps you don't understand the opportunity here. This kind of growth capital is rare in agricultural startups, particularly for operations like yours. The implication hung in the air that as a black woman she should be grateful for their interest. Amara smiled thinly. I understand perfectly. But Johnson Organic Empire isn't a startup. It's a thriving operation with 28% annual growth. We'll expand at our own pace with our values intact. 2 months later, Amara secured a smaller loan for the construction of their dairy processing facility, financed through traditional channels and reinvested profits. Standing at the groundbreaking ceremony, surrounded by her daughters and Curtis, she felt a profound sense of ownership that no investor money could have provided. While the investors departed disappointed, they failed to realize they had just lost the opportunity to invest in a company that, in just 5 years, would be valued at more than $200 million. While the investors departed disappointed, they failed to realize they had just lost the opportunity to invest in a company that, in just 5 years, would be valued at more than $200 million. Yet Amara Johnson had little time to dwell on paths not taken, as a new challenge was already brewing on the horizon. At 40 years old, Amara had weathered many storms, but nothing prepared her for the news that broke across Montana that summer. The meteorologist's grave face filled the television screen in the Johnson Organic Empire's conference room where Amara had gathered her management team. The National Weather Service is projecting the worst drought in 50 years to hit the western United States, the forecaster announced. Agricultural experts warn that many farms and ranches may not survive if conditions persist through next year. Silence fell across the room as the implications sank in. Amara exchanged a meaningful glance with Curtis, now 73 but still sharp as ever. Our source, she began, already calculating contingencies. Still strong, Curtis confirmed. It survived the '77 drought. It'll survive this one. The emergency planning meeting lasted well into the night. While other agricultural operations across Montana would be fighting for survival, Johnson Organic Empire faced a different challenge: how to maintain their commitment to community while protecting their business interests. We can't just watch our neighbors fail, Amara insisted, even as her financial director cautioned about resource management. Zora, now 11 and already showing remarkable environmental intuition, had been permitted to join the meeting. She spread out maps she'd been working on with surprising authority for someone so young. If we adjust our irrigation schedule and implement the conservation system I designed, we can share 20% of our water capacity without compromising our crops, she explained, pointing to carefully marked zones. Amara beamed with pride. That's exactly what we're going to do. The drought's impact became evident within weeks. Fields browned across the state, cattle prices plummeted as ranchers sold off herds they couldn't water, and a quiet desperation settled over rural communities. The first request for help came from Bill Peterson, a conventional farmer who had once mocked their organic methods as hippie nonsense. He stood awkwardly in Amara's office, hat literally in hand. My cattle are dying of thirst, Ms. Johnson, he admitted, eyes downcast. I've got nothing left to sell and the bank's calling in loans. Looking at the proud rancher reduced to begging, Amara thought briefly of the satisfaction of turning him away. But that wasn't who she was, nor the example she wanted to set for her daughters. "We'll work something out, Bill," she said instead. "Water access in exchange for labor and a transition to sustainable practices on your remaining acreage." Word spread quickly. Johnson Organic Empire became a lifeline for smaller operations throughout the county. Amara developed a fair exchange system, water access in return for labor, equipment sharing, or commitments to adopt more sustainable methods. During a regional agricultural emergency meeting in Billings, Amara found herself seated across from a face she hadn't seen in person for years. Elijah Williams had aged visibly, stress lines etching his once smooth face. The drought had hit traditional operations like Williams Ranch particularly hard, with their water-intensive practices proving unsustainable in the crisis. Their eyes met briefly across the room. Elijah looked away first, turning to whisper something to his ranch manager. Amara maintained her composure, though her heart raced traitorously in her chest. Later that week, Zora's irrigation innovation proved its worth. The system she had designed with the help of an engineering student from Montana State University reduced water usage by 40% while maintaining crop health, allowing Johnson Organic Empire to share resources while protecting their own production. "You're a genius," Amara told her daughter that evening, reviewing the data from the first implementation. Zora shrugged, but couldn't hide her smile. "It's just physics and biology, Mom. Anyone could figure it out if they tried." "No, not anyone," Curtis interjected from his favorite armchair. "Don't diminish your gifts, young lady." As the drought intensified, national media began reporting on the agricultural crisis. A producer from Western Farming Today contacted Amara, interested in featuring Johnson Organic Empire as the only operation flourishing amid devastation. The filming day arrived with unexpected nervousness. Amara had given dozens of presentations and interviews over the years, but national television coverage represented a new level of exposure. "Just be yourselves," she advised the triplets, who would be included in the segment. "You understand this business as well as anyone." The producer was visibly impressed by the girls, their articulate responses, their deep knowledge of the operation, and their evident passion for sustainable agriculture. "We learned everything from our mom," Maya explained on camera, her artistic confidence translating well to the interview format. "She always taught us that taking care of the land means the land takes care of you." "And your father?" the reporter asked innocently. "Is he involved in the business too?" A momentary silence fell before Olivia smoothly intervened. "Our family is our mom and Curtis. He's taught us everything about farming traditions." Curtis, watching from his chair out of camera range, wiped a suspicious moisture from his weathered cheek. The segment aired nationally 3 weeks later. The Johnson family gathered around the television, Curtis joining them with a bowl of popcorn. The piece was even better than Amara had hoped, highlighting their water conservation methods, organic practices, and community support initiatives. The drought that has devastated traditional agriculture across the West has only confirmed what Amara Johnson has been demonstrating for a decade: that sustainable farming isn't just environmentally responsible, it's economically resilient, the reporter concluded. The response was immediate and overwhelming. Orders flooded in from across the country. Agricultural programs requested tours. Investors began calling with increasingly generous offers. One call stood out, from a prestigious investment group based in Seattle that specialized in sustainable businesses. "We watched your feature," their representative explained. "We'd like to discuss a significant opportunity." When their helicopter landed on the newly constructed helipad 3 days later, Amara knew this was different from previous investment approaches. These weren't agricultural speculators but strategic partners who understood the values underlying her business. "We want to be part of American agriculture's future," explained Catherine Miller, the group's lead partner, as they toured the thriving fields that stood in stark contrast to the parched landscape beyond their boundaries. "What you've built here isn't just surviving, it's the model for what comes next." Their proposal was substantial: $25 million for 25% of the company, with guarantees of operational independence and commitments to maintain the ethical standards Amara had established. That evening, she discussed the offer with Curtis and the girls. Olivia, naturally, had already analyzed the terms. "The valuation is fair," she concluded, impressive in her financial acumen at just 11 years old. "But you should maintain 75% control, Mom. Never go below that." Maya was focused on brand integrity. "If we go national, we need consistent visuals," she insisted, already sketching expansion ideas for their packaging design. "I can create a style guide so every product feels part of the same family." After careful consideration, Amara accepted the modified deal, $25 million for 25%, with Amara retaining 75% ownership. The signing took place in the original farmhouse kitchen where everything had begun. A symbolic choice that wasn't lost on Curtis. Rather than an elaborate celebration, they marked the occasion with homemade pizza on the porch of the original farmhouse, watching the sunset over their fields. "What happens now?" Zora asked, always the one to look ahead. Amara spread out maps of 5 western states, with potential expansion locations already marked. "Now we bring Johnson Organic Empire to a national stage." Curtis raised his glass of Sunset Valley spring water. "To Amara Johnson, who built an empire from nothing but determination and love." As the family toasted their future, Amara felt a profound sense of validation. The drought that had devastated the Williams Empire had opened the path for the national expansion of Johnson Organic Empire, setting in motion the inevitable confrontation that nobody could have predicted. As the family toasted their future, Amara felt a profound sense of validation. The drought that had devastated the Williams Empire had opened the path for the national expansion of Johnson Organic Empire, setting in motion the inevitable confrontation that nobody could have predicted. 3 years after securing the pivotal investment, Amara Johnson stood at the floor-to-ceiling windows of her executive office on the top floor of a striking building in Jackson Hole, Wyoming. At 43, she had transformed not just herself, but an entire industry. The sleek glass and sustainable timber structure housed the headquarters of Johnson Organic Empire, now valued at over $500 million with 1,200 employees across 5 western states. The Grand Teton Mountains provided a majestic backdrop as Amara adjusted her impeccably tailored suit, a far cry from the second-hand clothes she'd worn in those early desperate days. Her box braids were styled in an elegant updo, and the confidence in her posture spoke of a woman who commanded respect without asking for it. "Ms. Johnson, Fortune just published the article," her assistant announced, entering with the glossy magazine. They sent over the advance copy by courier. Amara accepted the magazine, momentarily stunned to see herself on the cover beneath the headline, "The Queen of Sustainable Agriculture, How Amara Johnson Revolutionized American Agribusiness." "They did a good job," she murmured, scanning the feature that detailed her remarkable journey. "They certainly did," agreed her assistant. "The phones haven't stopped ringing since the digital version went live an hour ago." The path to this moment had been neither straight nor easy. After the drought investment, expansion had required delicate balancing, growing rapidly while maintaining the core values that defined Johnson Organic Empire. They had acquired strategic properties with water rights in Wyoming, Idaho, and eastern Washington, establishing regional hubs that implemented Amara's vision of sustainable agriculture. Curtis Montgomery, now 82 and using a wheelchair, had transitioned to his role as chairman of the advisory board with characteristic grace. Though physically diminished, his mind remained razor-sharp, and his approval was still the validation Amara valued most. "When I let you and those babies stay in my spare room, I never imagined all this," Curtis often remarked, gesturing to the empire they'd built together. "You are the daughter I never had." The triplets, now 14, had blossomed into extraordinary young women, each brilliant in her distinct way. Olivia, with her analytical mind, had developed a proprietary climate prediction algorithm that the company now used for crop planning. a technology that competing agricultural firms had offered millions to license. Maya's artistic talent had evolved into professional expertise. At 13, she had created the comprehensive visual identity for the Johnson brand that marketing consultants called a masterclass in authentic branding. Her designs graced every product, advertisement, and corporate material. Zora, the quietest of the three, had emerged as a scientific prodigy. Her water conservation project had won national recognition, catching the attention of environmental organizations and university research departments. At 14, she was already corresponding with leading scientists about climate adaptation strategies for agriculture. All three girls shared the same intense amber eyes, Elijah Williams' eyes, though they had never been told this. Whenever the inevitable questions about their father arose, Amara had settled on a half-truth. He chose not to be part of our story. For the triplets, Curtis was the only father figure they had ever known or needed. A notification flashed on Amara's computer screen, momentarily distracting her from the Fortune article. She clicked to open the email, and her breath caught sharply. Confirmation. Invitation accepted by Elijah Williams. Annual Harvest Festival and Charity Auction. The Jackson Hole Harvest Festival, scheduled for the following week, was the most prestigious event in the Western agricultural calendar. As the main sponsor this year, Amara would host the gala dinner and charity auction, with Johnson Organic Empire donating $1 million to sustainable agriculture programs in rural communities. She had known Elijah might attend. The invitation list included all major agricultural players in the region. But seeing the confirmation made it suddenly, uncomfortably real. In 15 years, she had carefully constructed a life where Elijah Williams didn't exist. Now, the past threatened to collide with the present. "Mom, I found the perfect dress." Maya burst into the office, followed closely by her sisters. "It's red like that suit you wore for Forbes." Amara quickly closed the notification. "That sounds wonderful, sweetheart. Why don't you show me later? I've got a call in 5 minutes." The girls nodded, accustomed to their mother's busy schedule, but Zora lingered, her perceptive gaze taking in Amara's slightly tensed shoulders and forced smile. She said nothing, but Amara knew her youngest had sensed something amiss. "Ms. Johnson, Mr. Montgomery is online too," her assistant announced through the intercom. Curtis rarely called during business hours. When Amara picked up, his voice sounded unusually concerned. "Amara, I just saw the final guest list for the auction. He's going to be there." "I know," she replied, swiveling her chair to face the mountains. "I just got the confirmation. Do you want me to handle it? One word to the organizers." "No," Amara interrupted, surprising herself with the firmness of her voice. "I don't run away anymore, Curtis. The Williams Ranch is failing. Everyone knows it. He's probably desperate for contacts. It doesn't matter. We won." After ending the call, Amara remained facing the mountains, thoughts drifting to the last time she had seen Elijah Williams. It had been 8 years ago, at that drought emergency meeting. Him already showing signs of strain, her operation already thriving. Since then, agricultural circles had buzzed with rumors of Williams Ranch's decline, failed expansions, lawsuits from underpaid workers, mounting debt. The evening before the festival, Amara stayed up late in her home office, reviewing every detail of the event. As CEO of a $500 million company, she had negotiated with senators, closed international contracts, and faced boardrooms dominated by men. None of it had prepared her for the whirlwind of emotions awaiting her. The girls were excited about their first major corporate gala. Olivia had researched all attending companies, identifying potential business connections. Maya had collaborated with the event designers on visual elements. Zora had ensured the entire event would be carbon neutral, a first for the festival. "Why are you nervous, Mom?" Zora asked, finding Amara checking her presentation notes for the 3rd time. Amara looked up, startled. Sometimes her daughter's perceptiveness was unnerving. "Just want everything to be perfect," she answered, kissing the top of Zora's head. Big day tomorrow. Is it because of that man who kept looking at your profile on the guest management system? Zora asked innocently. Elijah Williams. I noticed his name has been accessed multiple times. Amara froze. You've been monitoring the system access logs? Zora shrugged. I helped design the security protocols. It's interesting to see patterns. With a pang, Amara realized how much her daughters had grown up in this corporate world she'd created, how normal it seemed to them to track data points and analyze systems that most adults wouldn't comprehend. Get some sleep, sweetheart, she said gently. Tomorrow will be a big day. In the early hours of the festival morning, Amara stood before the mirror in the presidential suite of the Four Seasons Jackson Hole, adjusting her vibrant red blazer over a crisp white silk blouse. Her reflection showed a woman transformed from the broken, pregnant 29-year-old who had once been dismissed as insignificant. I'm ready, she whispered to herself, straightening her shoulders. What she didn't say, couldn't articulate even to herself, was that part of her had been preparing for this confrontation for 15 years, not for revenge exactly, but for the moment when Elijah Williams would be forced to see what he had thrown away, what he had deemed unworthy of the Williams name. Looking at the notification that had flashed on the computer screen of Amara's desk that autumn afternoon, she realized that the moment she had mentally rehearsed for 15 years had arrived, not as a calculated revenge, but as a long overdue liberation. Looking at the notification that had flashed on the computer screen of Amara's desk that autumn afternoon, she realized that the moment she had mentally rehearsed for 15 years had arrived, not as a calculated revenge, but as a long overdue liberation. The night before the Jackson Hole Harvest Festival found Amara in her presidential suite, meticulously reviewing her presentation for what seemed like the 100th time. Every slide was perfect, the donation announcement carefully worded, yet she couldn't shake the underlying tension that had nothing to do with public speaking. Mom, can I borrow your pearl earrings for tomorrow? Maya called from the adjoining room where the triplets were still excitedly discussing the event. Of course, sweetheart, Amara replied, forcing warmth into her voice despite the knot in her stomach. She turned back to her speech, but the words blurred before her eyes. 15 years of building an empire, of raising 3 extraordinary daughters, of proving her worth to a world that had once rejected her, and still the thought of facing Elijah Williams made her palms sweat. Olivia appeared in the doorway, tablet in hand. I've analyzed the guest list and identified 17 potential business connections we should prioritize, she announced, ever practical. I've highlighted the 5 most promising in yellow. Amara accepted the tablet, scanning the meticulously organized spreadsheet. Her eldest daughter had categorized attendees by industry influence, potential partnership value, and political connections, a level of strategic thinking that would impress seasoned executives, let alone coming from a 14-year-old. This is excellent work, Olivia, she praised, scrolling through the list until her finger hesitated over one particular name. Elijah Williams, categorized as low priority, declining influence. Is something wrong with my assessment? Olivia asked, noticing her mother's pause. Amara quickly scrolled past the name. Not at all. Your analysis is spot on. Later that evening, after sending the girls to bed, Amara stepped onto the suite's balcony overlooking the moonlit Tetons. The crisp mountain air filled her lungs as she tried to calm her racing thoughts. You've faced worse than this, she whispered to herself. Much worse. Her phone buzzed with a text from Curtis. All set for tomorrow. Wheelchair or not, I'll be right beside you when that man shows his face. Amara smiled at the protective message. Curtis had been more a father to her than her own had ever managed to be, and certainly more a grandfather to the triplets than Elijah could ever claim to be. She typed back, I know you will, but this isn't a confrontation. It's just business. Even as she sent the message, Amara knew it wasn't entirely true. 15 years of buried emotions couldn't simply be dismissed as just business. Sleep proved elusive. Amara found herself reviewing memories like slides in a presentation. The crushing devastation in Elijah's office, the cold night in that cheap motel, the ultrasound revealing 3 heartbeats, Curtis's weathered hand extending in partnership, the first sale, the first expansion, each triumph building upon the last. By dawn, she was already awake, watching the sun paint the mountains gold. The day she had unconsciously been building toward for 15 years had arrived. Across town, in a significantly less impressive hotel room, Elijah Williams sat surrounded by newspaper clippings and printouts about Amara Johnson and her agricultural empire. An empty whiskey glass rested by his elbow, and his once pristine appearance had given way to a rumpled shirt and tired eyes. "Elijah, are you coming to bed?" called a voice from the adjoining room. Tiffany Caldwell, 26 and ambitious, had attached herself to the Williams name 2 years ago, attracted by its historical prominence rather than its current reality. "In a minute," he replied distractedly, staring at a Forbes article featuring Amara's confident smile beneath the headline, "The Future of American Agriculture." "You're obsessed with that woman," Tiffany complained, appearing in the doorway in an expensive silk nightgown, one of the many luxuries she insisted upon despite Williams Ranch's precarious finances. "Who is she to you anyway?" Elijah took a slow sip of whiskey. "I made the biggest mistake of my life 15 years ago." "What, you dated her or something?" Tiffany's laugh was dismissive. "She's not even that pretty." Elijah's knuckles whitened around his glass. The memories flooded back. Amara standing in his office, dignified even in her devastation. The check he'd written so carelessly. The cruel words he'd spoken. "It was more complicated than that," he murmured. Tiffany rolled her eyes. "Well, I need you to focus on tomorrow. This festival is full of investors, and Williams Ranch needs new capital." She emphasized the last words pointedly, a frequent reminder of the financial realities he preferred to ignore. After she returned to bed, Elijah pulled out the financial reports he'd been avoiding. The latest bank notices used phrases like foreclosure proceedings and final opportunity to restructure debt. 3 generations of Williams' prosperity had crumbled under his management, accelerated by the drought and his stubborn refusal to adopt sustainable practices. Tomorrow's festival represented perhaps his last chance to secure the connections needed to save his family's legacy. The irony wasn't lost on him, seeking salvation at an event hosted by the woman he had once discarded. Morning arrived with a flurry of activity in the presidential suite. The triplets coordinated their outfits, 3 distinct styles that nonetheless harmonized perfectly, a visual metaphor for their personalities. "The red accents complement Mom's blazer," Maya explained, adjusting Zora's collar. "We'll look united but individual." "Remember, we represent Johnson Organic Empire," Olivia reminded her sisters, ever conscious of their role, professional but approachable. Amara watched her daughters with a surge of pride so intense it momentarily overshadowed her anxiety about the impending encounter. These remarkable young women were her true achievement. Not the empire, not the wealth, but these 3 souls she had raised to be confident, brilliant, and kind despite beginning their lives under the shadow of rejection. Curtis arrived, dapper in his wheelchair, his white hair and beard meticulously groomed. "Ready to show them what a real agricultural empire looks like?" he asked with a wink. "More than ready," Amara replied, drawing strength from his unwavering support. The Johnson entourage arrived at the convention center early, Amara insisting on personally overseeing the final details of their elaborate display. The Johnson Organic Empire booth dominated the center of the main hall, showcasing their new line of regenerative foods alongside a video highlighting their social impact initiatives in rural communities. "The lighting on the water display needs adjustment," Amara noted, her professional focus momentarily displacing her personal concerns. As the hall began filling with attendees, Amara found herself unconsciously scanning faces, simultaneously dreading and anticipating one in particular. The triplets moved with practiced ease among the gathering crowds, their natural poise drawing admiring glances. "You raised them well," Curtis observed, positioning his wheelchair beside Amara. "They belong in this world." "They belong anywhere they choose to be," she corrected gently, remembering how she had once been made to feel like an outsider. It was Olivia who noticed first, her sharp eyes missing nothing. "That man hasn't stopped staring at you for the past 5 minutes, Mom," she remarked casually, arranging product samples with precision. Amara didn't need to turn to know. She felt the weight of that gaze like a physical pressure, a sensation that transported her instantly back 15 years, standing in a mahogany-paneled office as her world collapsed. Taking a deep breath, she turned slowly, deliberately. Elijah Williams stood 10 meters away, a whiskey glass hanging loosely from his hand. Time had not been kind to the once impressive heir. His blonde hair had receded significantly. A noticeable paunch strained the vest of his worn suit, and deep lines of worry creased around his eyes. Beside him, a much younger blonde woman in a dress too tight for the occasion looked bored and impatient. For a moment, frozen in time, Amara and Elijah's gazes locked across the crowded hall. His face registered a cascade of emotions: shock, recognition, disbelief, and finally, something that looked remarkably like shame. Curtis immediately moved to Amara's side, placing a protective hand on her shoulder. "You don't have to do this now," he murmured. "Yes, I do," she replied, keeping her eyes fixed on Elijah. At that precise moment, the master of ceremonies took the stage, his amplified voice filling the hall. "Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the 75th Annual Jackson Hole Harvest Festival. We are honored to have with us today the main sponsor of our event, a woman whose vision has transformed the agricultural landscape of the American West. Please welcome with a warm round of applause the CEO of Johnson Organic Empire, Ms. Amara Johnson, accompanied by her daughters Olivia, Maya, and Zora, and her mentor, the legendary Curtis Montgomery. As Amara walked toward the stage, she felt Elijah's gaze following her every step. The triplets followed behind her, resplendent in their coordinated outfits, their identical faces displaying the same elegance and confidence as their mother. The genetic resemblance was undeniable: the same eye shape, the same defined chin, the same distinctive amber eyes that had been a hallmark of the Williams family for generations. Separated by merely a few kilometers that night, neither Amara nor Elijah managed to sleep, both knowing that the Harvest Festival would be not just a social event, but the reckoning that 15 years of history demanded. Separated by merely a few kilometers that night, neither Amara nor Elijah managed to sleep, both knowing that the Harvest Festival would be not just a social event, but the reckoning that 15 years of history demanded. The Jackson Hole Harvest Festival transformed the city's convention center into a spectacle of rural opulence. Antler chandeliers hung from the high ceilings, casting a warm glow over tables draped with pristine white linen. Each centerpiece featured a carefully arranged display of sunflowers and wheat, while waiters circulated with trays of champagne and locally sourced canapés. Amara had arrived early with Curtis and the triplets, her crimson blazer a striking contrast against the earth tones dominating the room. She moved with practiced confidence among the vendors and exhibitors, personally inspecting the Johnson Organic Empire's central display. The company's new regenerative food line was arranged artfully beneath a high-definition screen showing footage of their community initiatives: farm apprenticeships for low-income students, water access programs for struggling communities, educational outreach in rural schools. "The lighting on the sustainable packaging display needs adjustment," she instructed a staff member, her attention to detail unwavering despite the emotional undercurrent of the day. Curtis positioned his wheelchair near the booth, his watchful eyes taking in the growing crowd. "Quite the turnout," he observed. "Every agricultural player west of the Mississippi seems to be here." Amara nodded, unconsciously scanning the entrance doors. It's become the industry event of the year, the perfect showcase for our million-dollar initiative. The triplets moved through the gathering with natural grace, already showing the professional poise that would serve them throughout their lives. Olivia engaged a state senator in conversation about tax incentives for sustainable farming, while Maya discussed design philosophy with the event's creative director. Zora, characteristically, had found the building's chief engineer and was deep in conversation about the convention center's water recycling system. "That man hasn't stopped looking at you for the past 5 minutes, Mom," Olivia said quietly, suddenly appearing at Amara's side. Amara didn't need to turn to know who it was. She felt the weight of that gaze, a sensation that transported her instantly back 15 years, standing in that mahogany-paneled office as her world collapsed. Taking a deliberate breath, she turned slowly, meeting the eyes that had once held her future, and then so carelessly discarded it. Elijah Williams stood motionless 10 meters away, a whiskey glass clutched loosely in his hand. The years had not been kind to him. His once thick blonde hair had receded significantly, revealing a high forehead lined with stress. The tailored suits that had once emphasized his athletic build had been replaced by a slightly worn ensemble that strained across a noticeable paunch. Deep creases framed his eyes, not laugh lines, but the marks of worry and disappointment. Beside him stood a young blonde woman, barely in her 20s, wearing a dress too tight and too short for the occasion. She tapped impatiently on her phone, visibly bored by the agricultural gathering. For a moment suspended in time, Amara and Elijah's gazes locked across the crowded hall. His face registered a cascade of emotions: shock at seeing her in person after so long, recognition of her success, disbelief at her transformation, and finally, something that looked remarkably like shame. Curtis immediately moved to Amara's side, his protective instinct unchanged by age or physical limitation. "You don't have to do this now," he murmured, placing his weathered hand on her arm. "Yes, I do," she replied, her voice steady. This confrontation had been 15 years in the making. At that precise moment, the master of ceremonies tapped the microphone, his amplified voice filling the hall. "Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the 75th Annual Jackson Hole Harvest Festival. We are honored to have with us today the main sponsor of our event, a woman whose vision has transformed the agricultural landscape of the American West. Please welcome with a warm round of applause the CEO of Johnson Organic Empire, Ms. Amara Johnson, accompanied by her daughters Olivia, Maya, and Zora, and her mentor, the legendary Curtis Montgomery." Applause erupted as Amara made her way to the stage, her stride confident and unhurried. The triplets followed, their coordinated outfits creating a visual harmony that drew admiring glances. As they passed near Elijah's position, Amara felt a fierce pride. These extraordinary young women were her true triumph, her living rebuke to the man who had deemed them unworthy before they were even born. From the podium, Amara delivered a speech that was both personal and visionary. She spoke of sustainable agriculture not just as a business model but as a moral imperative. She announced the company's $1 million donation to rural agricultural education programs, emphasizing the importance of bringing diverse voices into the industry's future. "Because we believe the future of these lands belongs to all of us," she concluded, her gaze briefly meeting Elijah's in the crowd. The thunderous applause that followed felt like vindication. As she descended from the stage, Amara saw Elijah moving determinedly in her direction, his face pale as if he'd seen a ghost. His young companion was engaged in animated conversation with an elderly senator, oblivious to the drama unfolding. "Amara," he called, his voice hoarser than she remembered. "You look different." 15 years will do that to a person," she replied evenly, maintaining a professional smile for any onlookers. Elijah shifted uncomfortably, his eyes darting to the triplets now chatting animatedly with a group of young farmers several meters away. "Those girls, they're..." He couldn't seem to finish the sentence, his gaze fixed on their profiles, the unmistakable amber eyes, the defined jawlines that mirrored his own. "My daughters," Amara completed simply. "They're 15 years old," Elijah calculated aloud, the realization washing over his features. "They have they're Johnsons," Curtis interjected firmly, maneuvering his wheelchair between them. "Amara, the governor would like to speak with you about that urban agriculture initiative." Before they could move away, Elijah's young companion appeared, latching onto his arm possessively. "Eli, darling, aren't you going to introduce me? This must be the famous Amara Johnson. I read about you in Forbes last month. God, that article about how you acquired the Anderson lands was fascinating." Elijah looked as if he had swallowed something bitter. "Tiffany, this is Amara. We knew each other a long time ago." "And these must be your daughters. They're adorable," Tiffany continued, oblivious to the tension crackling in the air. "You all look so familiar somehow." Amara watched emotions war across Elijah's face, panic, shame, and something like desperation. Before the awkward moment could stretch further, the master of ceremonies saved them all. "Ladies and gentlemen, the charity auction will begin in 5 minutes. Please take your seats in the main ballroom." During the auction, Amara discreetly observed Elijah from her prime table near the stage. He seemed uncomfortable among the agricultural elite, subtly avoided by former colleagues who had once courted his favor. When the opening lot, water rights for 1,000 acres, was announced, Elijah raised his bidding paddle, only to be quickly outbid by a consortium of farmers operating cooperatively. Whispers circulated through the hall as the auction progressed. "Williams Ranch is on the verge of bankruptcy," murmured a banker seated at Amara's table. 3 consecutive failed harvests, ill-advised investments in outdated techniques, and a series of labor lawsuits have decimated their reserves. Amara nodded politely but offered no comment. The financial struggles of Williams Ranch were common knowledge in industry circles, a cautionary tale of resistance to change in a rapidly evolving agricultural landscape. When the auction concluded, Amara found herself momentarily alone near the bar, reviewing notes for her closing remarks. She sensed his presence before she heard his voice. "Those girls are my daughters, aren't they?" The question came as an urgent whisper behind her. Elijah had clearly been drinking more since their earlier encounter. Amara turned slowly, maintaining her composure. "Biologically speaking, yes." "Why did you never tell me? I had the right to know." Indignation flooded his voice, a misplaced righteous anger that made Amara give a short, humorless laugh. "Right? You told me to solve the problem and go back to the ghetto I came from. Your exact words, if I recall correctly, were that a black child would never have a place in the Williams dynasty." Her voice remained controlled, though several heads nearby had begun to turn in their direction. "I was young and stupid," he argued, running a hand through his thinning hair. "My father was pressuring me. The ranch was going through difficulties. I panicked." "Panic? Is that what you call calculated cruelty?" Amara maintained her composure, years of board meetings having perfected her ability to remain calm under pressure. "I'm not interested in your excuses, Elijah, nor would my daughters be." "They need a father," he insisted, growing desperation evident in his voice. "They've had Curtis, who has been more of a father in 15 years than you could ever be in a lifetime." While the words of Elijah's accusation echoed in the air between them, Amara realized that the moment she had mentally rehearsed for 15 years had arrived, not as a calculated revenge, but as a long overdue liberation. While the words of Elijah's accusation echoed in the air between them, Amara remained unshaken, her posture straight and dignified against his increasingly desperate demeanor. The confrontation that she had mentally rehearsed for 15 years had finally arrived, bringing not the bitter taste of revenge she had once anticipated, but something more profound: liberation. "They need a father? Now?" Amara's voice was measured but carried an edge sharp enough to cut through his pretense. "You had 15 years, Elijah. 15 years during which you never once tried to find out what happened to the woman you discarded." The triplets approached, curiosity evident in their identical amber eyes as they observed the tense interaction. Elijah's gaze darted between them, his face paling further as he took in the unmistakable genetic markers, his chin, his cheekbones, his eyes, replicated perfectly in triplicate and blended with Amara's elegant features. "Mom, is everything okay?" Olivia asked, her analytical gaze assessing Elijah with cool precision. Amara took a deep breath. The moment she had both dreaded and anticipated had arrived sooner than expected. "Girls, this is Elijah Williams. He's your biological father." A charged silence fell among them. Maya's artistic sensitivity registered first, her eyes immediately filling with carefully contained tears. Zora's expression remained neutral, her scientist's mind cataloging this new information dispassionately. Olivia, ever the pragmatist, simply narrowed her eyes. "Why didn't you want us?" Maya's question cut through the silence, direct and devastating in its simplicity. Elijah flinched as if physically struck. I didn't," he stammered, searching for words that wouldn't come. "It was complicated." "Actually, it wasn't complicated at all," Amara corrected, placing a protective arm around Maya's shoulders. "Mr. Williams made it very clear that children with my skin color weren't welcome in his family's legacy." Curtis maneuvered his wheelchair closer, creating a united front with Amara and the girls. His weathered face held no anger, only a quiet dignity that seemed to shrink Elijah further. "I was wrong," Elijah admitted, his voice barely audible above the ambient noise of the gala. "I've regretted it every day since." "Regret is convenient when you're facing bankruptcy," Olivia observed coldly, her financial acumen evident even at 14. "Your timing seems calculated, Mr. Williams." Elijah's face flushed. "It's not about money. Seeing you now, knowing who you are, you're extraordinary. All of you." "We know," Zora replied simply. Tiffany appeared suddenly, champagne glass in hand, scanning the tense gathering with growing confusion. "What's going on? Why is everyone looking so serious?" Before anyone could respond, Maya turned to her, artistic temperament giving way to protective fury. "He abandoned us before we were born because we wouldn't be white enough for his precious family name." Tiffany's confusion morphed into shock as she looked from the triplets to Elijah. You have children? Secret children?" "Tiffany, it's not what you—" Elijah began, reaching for her arm. The young woman recoiled, champagne sloshing over the rim of her glass. "You've been hiding 3 teenage daughters, all while talking about starting our own family?" Her voice rose, drawing glances from nearby attendees. "You lying, pathetic waste!" With a dramatic flourish, she threw the remainder of her champagne directly into Elijah's face and stormed away, heels clicking against the polished floor, shouting something about secret children and deceitful bastard as she went. Elijah stood dripping, humiliation complete, as whispers spread through the nearby crowd. The triplets exchanged glances, a silent communication developed over years of shared existence. "We should go prepare for the closing ceremony," Olivia suggested, practical as always. "It was informative meeting you, Mr. Williams," Zora added with clinical politeness. Maya said nothing, turning away with a small sob that she quickly controlled. As the girls walked away, Elijah made a desperate lunge toward Amara. "Please, we need to talk privately. You don't understand. I'm losing everything. The ranch, my family's heritage. Maybe we could reach some kind of arrangement. A merger between our companies, perhaps? For the girls' sake?" His touch on her arm sent unwelcome memories flooding back. The empty apartment, the humiliation, the sleepless nights working while pregnant. Amara carefully removed his hand. "Your company is worth less than 1/10 of mine," she responded with clinical calm. "What kind of CEO would I be if I made such a poor deal?" The following morning, Amara sat in her suite reviewing local news coverage of the festival when Curtis knocked on her door, newspaper in hand. "You've seen this?" he asked, handing her the Jackson Hole Daily. In the social column, a small note mentioned the drama at the Harvest Festival and speculated about the connection between the Queen of Organic Agriculture and the declining heir. "It was inevitable," Amara sighed, folding the newspaper. "We need to talk to the girls." The conversation proved more difficult than she had anticipated. Seated on the suite sofa, the three teenagers processed the information with distinct emotional responses: Olivia with calculated anger, Maya with silent tears, and Zora with clinical curiosity. "Why didn't he want us?" Maya verbalized the question that hung in the air. Amara chose her words carefully. "He wasn't ready to be a father. And honestly, I don't believe he is now." "He's going to try to get close to us, isn't he?" Olivia asked, pragmatic as always. "Now that he knows who we are, now that we're worth something." "That decision will be yours when you're old enough," Amara replied. "But remember, you never needed him to be extraordinary." The festival's closing dinner was scheduled for that evening. Amara considered not attending but refused to give the impression she was running away. The triplets insisted on accompanying her, united as always in difficult moments. Dressed in coordinated elegant dresses, Olivia in navy blue, Maya in emerald green, and Zora in deep purple, the girls entered the hall with heads held high, flanking their mother in her striking white dress. The message was clear. They were a fortress, impenetrable and united. Elijah sat alone at a table in the back, his suit wrinkled, suggesting a poorly slept night. Throughout dinner, he observed from a distance as dignitaries, politicians, and business leaders stopped by Amara's table to pay their respects. The triplets charmed everyone with their eloquence and knowledge, obviously accustomed to moving in circles of power from an early age. Midway through dessert, Elijah finally gathered courage to approach their table, swaying slightly. "Amara, girls, may I join you for a moment?" he asked, his voice strained. Curtis began to rise protectively, but Amara touched his arm gently. "It's okay." "I'd like to speak with my daughters," Elijah announced, loud enough for nearby tables to hear. "We're not your daughters," Olivia replied coldly. "A sperm donor isn't a father." Elijah paled. "You don't understand. I made a terrible mistake, but I can make it up to you now. I have connections. I can open doors." "What doors exactly?" Zora interrupted. "Harvard has already accepted me into their early admission program for environmental sciences. Olivia has a pending patent for an irrigation system that saves 40% of water, and Maya just sold her first art collection to the White Horse Gallery in New York. And they all have trust funds that will ensure they never need financial support," Amara added calmly. "Curtis saw to that the day they were born." Elijah looked at Curtis, the old rancher who now observed him with a mixture of pity and disdain. "You knew who I was, all this time?" "Knew the moment I saw the girls," Curtis responded. "William's eyes are unmistakable, but a man who abandons a pregnant woman doesn't deserve the title of father." Elijah's humiliation was palpable. Around them, conversations had ceased. All eyes turned to the drama unfolding. "Amara, please," Elijah begged, his voice breaking. "William's ranch is on the brink of bankruptcy. My father died last year, leaving enormous debts. I have third-generation employees who will lose everything. If we could just collaborate somehow. A merger, perhaps? For the girls' sake?" Amara observed him for a long moment. The man before her was no longer the arrogant young heir who had dismissed her as inferior. He was merely a shadow, worn down by years of poor decisions and missed opportunities. "My team will contact yours tomorrow," she finally said. "Johnson Organic Empire might be interested in acquiring some of your lands for expansion. We'll offer a fair market price, no more, no less." "And what about the girls? Don't they have a right to the Williams name? To the family heritage?" Maya, always the most emotional of the three, finally spoke. What heritage exactly? A failing farm? A name tarnished by outdated agricultural practices? Or the legacy of a man who rejected 3 unborn children because their skin would be too dark? The silence that followed was deafening. Elijah stood there exposed and humiliated, his public shame complete. "Mr. Williams," said Amara, rising with the dignity that had become her trademark, "you asked years ago if I really thought I could raise a child in this town, in this state. The answer stands before you. Not only did I raise 3, but I built an empire that your daughters will one day inherit. An empire based on respect, sustainability, and community, values that the Williams Empire clearly forgot long ago." If you enjoyed today's video, I'm sure you'll love the next one. Don't waste time. Just click on the screen.